Hello, my name is Rachel Barr, and I'm Director of Research and Health at Canada's National Ballet School.
And I'm Aubrey Lynch, Dean of Students and Director of ABT Wellness and ABT Rise with American Ballet Theater.
Together, along with colleagues from dance training institutions from around the world, we are excited to welcome you to the inaugural International Youth Dancer Health Awareness Week 2025.
This new global initiative for dancer well-being was created to share knowledge about the unique health needs of youth dancers.
In its inaugural year, the focus of our Knowledge Translation Week is on relative energy deficiency. While relative energy deficiency in sport, or RED-S, has been talked about for several years now, relative energy deficiency in dance, RED-D, has only recently been more broadly recognized as a unique critical consideration for dancers. As this burgeoning field is evolving, you may hear various acronyms describing relative energy deficiency in these recordings, including REDS, RED-S, RED-D, or REDS-D. For the most part, all of our panelists are referring to the same thing.
Through this event, we hope that whether you're a young dancer, dance faculty, or parent of a young dancer, you can learn more about this important issue and how to prevent and address it if and when it comes up. After viewing the keynote discussion, you'll find 3 panels geared specifically towards young dancers, dance faculty, artistic staff, or any other person that works directly with dancers, or parents of young dancers.
We hope you will find these videos informative and invite you to share questions and comments in the survey linked below each video.
And now over to our keynote discussion.
Hello, welcome to the International REDS Awareness Week with IYDHA. I'm delighted to be introducing the keynote today with Dr. Joe Larkin and Stephen McRae. I'm Karen Sheriff. I'm the former head of healthcare at the Royal Ballet School and now executive director of Project RED-D. Do you want to both introduce yourselves?
Sure. Shall I go first?
Good, right.
I'm Dr. Joe Larkin. I'm a consultant in sport and exercise medicine, and I've been working in the elite performance arena for 15 plus years now. And my direct relationship with ballets, I support the English National Ballet School as a kind of part of their multidisciplinary team as an external medical provider.
My name is Stephen McRae. I'm a principal dancer with the Royal Ballet. I trained here at the Royal Ballet School before joining the company, and I've been fortunate to have a wonderful career with the company. But within that time, I've had to explore the ups and downs of the profession, navigating major injuries, and the re-education that's come with that, which we'll no doubt talk about today.
Brilliant. Well, I think we're just going to start by just talking about, Joe, maybe briefly explaining what REDS is. It might be called RED-S, RED-D, and why is it so particularly relevant in the world of dance?
Okay, so relative energy deficiency syndrome or disease is a spectrum of different symptoms, but ultimately it's a very simple concept of, are you consuming enough energy, i.e. food, to put with the energy output that you are doing in the form of dance and exercise. And sometimes it could be intentional or unintentional deficits or overtraining or underfueling. But what ends up happening is over time, it gradually creeps up that the deficit has an impact on your body. And sometimes it can be subtle things like fatigue or feeling not recovered. And then as the time goes on, your body has to prioritize beating of your heart and performing in the classes. And so therefore it has to choose where the energy goes. And the energy goes to those activities, which means it starts to stop all the other important functions of the body, such as building bone strength, and in the case of females, menstrual cycle, delays in periods or erratic periods. In men, we quite often see it a little bit later. So yes, they get the same symptoms of fatigue and performance impact and maybe recurrent illnesses or little niggles of injuries. But generally speaking, their metabolic injury, for want of a better word, and presents a little bit later with thyroid dysfunction and other blood markers. So being aware of those earlier signs and symptoms is really important, because for such a simple addressment of the balance, you can have then a really good, healthy body, but more importantly, they could be performing and dancing to a better level, which I think is something I think we forget to talk about for the dancers, but ultimately it's for their best interest, not just in the now, but in the long term of their future, of their health.
And I think it's a really important point that it can affect both males and females equally. And I think it started as the female triad, but it's moved along because we know it affects both genders equally. Stephen, from your experience, how aware do you think dancers are, both students and professional dancers, of REDS?
I think the actual term REDS is still very new, particularly for dancers. It's not a term that I most certainly wasn't educated about. It's obviously come about in more recent years. But the actual understanding of what that means, it's not a new concept. Energy deficiency is something we know exists, and there are obviously practicalities of a working day, whether you're a student or a professional, navigating those periods of time where you can refuel. There's obviously been a greater shift in educating how to refuel as well. How I refueled when I joined the company to how I refuel now is a very different story. They were not healthy habits when I was younger. And as Joe has said, it didn't catch up with me very quickly. It took quite far into my career for my body to finally start to shut down. And I think through my own injuries, I've had to really re-educate myself about what that meant, how I can improve on that, how I can do it better, how I can share my experience with others. And I've realized now that much of that falls underneath the umbrella of REDS.
And obviously you're very open about it, hence you being here today and speaking in other platforms. Do you think that it's something your peers are equally as open about, or even with each other, or do you think it's still relatively quietly spoken about?
I would love it to be spoken about much more.
Yeah.
It's unfortunately not, but I think it's just part of the narrative where the introduction of much more support medically with sports science, all those elements that organizations like the Royal Ballet School, the Royal Ballet Company, and many of the schools involved with this particular discussion, they are starting to implement more support with that. But the narrative around that has always been, oh, if you're seeking that support, there's something wrong with you. And we're changing that narrative that this support is there to literally do that, support you.
Yeah.
It's not, oh, you're damaged or there's something wrong with you. It's more about having maybe some of that self-courage, that self-trust to also identify it for yourself that something's not quite right here, and go and seek some of that support and advice from a professional, not from social media, from a professional.
Yeah.
And I think that's where I would love to see the movement start to go, that these important influences and support from the world of science and medicine, and also from sport. I know people don't like to really talk about that, but those influences there are only there to enhance the beauty of our profession. It's, as Joe said, to enable a dancer to flourish at an even higher level, but that takes a shift in the way that we relate to fueling.
That's it. Just on the back of that, so I think when we were talking about these conversations before Phil and today, when I do experience interactions with athletes from other sports versus the performing arts and the dancers, as we alluded to, there is this kind of, I'm worried about seeking help, but they also find it intrusive to be asked these questions. Whereas in other performance arenas where the objective goal is to get a gold medal or to win Wimbledon or whatever it is, they want to have everything ticking in the right, everything has to be timed to the right precision, fueled to the right precision, to the point where we create disordered eating in a different way, i.e. that perfection on the timing of every single nutrient. But at the same time, it'd be really nice if it just didn't feel an awkward conversation. Yeah. It should be part of, you're a performing artist, you're a dancer, and what's the best way we can get you to perform to your top level, and change the narrative to be a bit more around positive language around what the performance outcome is, rather than the aesthetic component, which unfortunately is part of the reason why I think certain sports and particularly dance have the issues of REDS.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that openness and those conversations is hopefully going to only support that. And Stephen touched on what it might feel like and noticing when something doesn't feel right. Joe, what do you think, what would you say the early warning signs are to account for if you're a dancer, perhaps you're a parent or a teacher? What would that look like and what would you want people to come forward with for help?
Well, I think first and foremost, do you feel recovered from the session before and are ready to perform or dance? And if you're not, then it might not even be relative energy deficiency. It's just maybe the load and the transition from being preschool to in the school dancing volume is a shock to the body. And what can you do best to, help your body recover? And that's obviously sleep, nutrition, hydration. If you look at that the triangle, the pyramid of recovery. And I think if you're not recovering, then you've got to question why not. And then if your body is feeling fatigued, heavy legs was something that was described to me just recently, or just lots of niggles that you see your peers recovering from but you're not recovering from, or even simple things like constantly getting colds and sniffles or feeling run down. They're all things I would definitely say come and present, because the other thing as well is there's lots of other causes for those reasons. And so by hiding it until you go further down the line, it's not actually to your advantage, because it could be just a simple deficiency of vitamin D or a subtle anemia that just needs some nutritional balance or some supplements, which then helps you. I think because everyone presumes those symptoms may be a weakness, actually they don't want to present. And I think the biggest time for me, particularly with the students that I'm seeing, that transition from year into year one, from fitting maybe 4 or 5 hours of ballet around a school schedule to now a formalized vocational training program, they're going to feel tired, but maybe just checking in and saying to yourself, am I ready today? And unfortunately, most dancers present too late, and they present to me with an injury, classically the bone stress response. And by that point, the damage is already done. We just hope the long-term health, the bone health, isn't impacted. But I have seen, unfortunately, some really young people with osteoporosis in their late teens, early 20s, which that's a really sad sign, because something should have happened earlier on.
Yeah, and I think it is those short-term symptoms and that long-term problem that we're trying to sort of prevent as much as possible.
I think it's also that mentality, and also it's an important message, particularly for the younger people watching this, that those early years are just the absolute foundation and rock that you're going to build your career on. And by not addressing those symptoms, listening to that inner voice, recognizing with full self-belief that, okay, something is a bit off here, I need to get that support, have the courage to speak about it, because those early years will absolutely set you up for the longevity of your career.
So Joe, in your experience, when people come to see you in the clinic with REDS or potential REDS in your young people, do you look anything around growth and maturation? And also, how do you assess for the psychological aspect of REDS?
So anyone that walks through my door will get a holistic review, and then that would include their psychological well-being, because it's really obviously key to how the happiness is and how they're engaging in life in general. But also with regards to more physical components, yes, we do look at the height and weight of the individual, and it's not just a one-off snapshot, it's the trend. So what percentile were they as a child growing up, and are they staying in that percentile, or are they starting to plateau or in fact drop percentiles, which is even more concerning. We also look at actually the genetic predisposition of the individual. So what that means in layman's terms is, what is the mum and dad's height and their siblings' height? And unfortunately, we do see a trend towards the individual that's suffering with RED-S to not be hitting their goals that you would normally expect within development. And that is, again, going back to that original thing, the body hasn't got the fuel to prioritize growth. It hasn't got the priority to put the energy into cellular turnover other than just keeping the person functioning and alive. And so what you will naturally see is the individual compared to the rest of the family, unless they're all, dancers or, you know, high-end elite performers, they will basically have dropped off or be in a different percentile to the rest of the family. And it is quite a noticeable thing when people are starting to suffer with RED-S because they're already on that lower percentile. So that drop off is quite noticeable in the physical as well as also measurements we take.
And perhaps in that sense, it's quite useful for parents to maybe consider that if they're worried about their child, they will look at their growth and know if somebody's growing in a way they always have or perhaps dropping off, and go flag it at that point. Stephen, do you recognise through any of these early symptoms Joe's spoken about anything that you felt yourself or maybe friends and colleagues have told you they felt about if they have REDS? But is there anything that you identify with and what we've been talking about?
Yeah, I think my first, I mean, again, when I was realizing a lot of this, I didn't know of REDS. But obviously looking back and assessing those particular chapters in my career, my initial realization that something wasn't right was more the mental side of things. And I'd entered a zone where I was quite low. I would finish performances that were the dream role with the dream ballerina in cinema relays around the world, and would be having what I thought was the highest of highs, go to the dressing room, and I was empty. And then it was affecting life. I was not interested in being sociable. If there was a day off, it was almost going into hibernation mode. There was nothing left for anything else. I had purely enough to do what I needed to do, and that was it. And when your brain starts to say, oh, am I enjoying this? Do I still love this? For an artist who's been passionate about something from such a young age, that's a big alarm bell. It's huge. And I really didn't listen to that. I just assumed maybe it's time, maybe the passion's run out. And looking back at images and video footage of me at that point, I'd become a young father. I was clearly underfueled, and that had gone on for a very long time. The body finally gave way. That's when I snapped my Achilles. And I'm honestly glad that happened, though, because it enabled me to realize, no, I love this profession. I absolutely love it. It's given me a life I could never have imagined. And it gave me a second chance to go back and re-educate myself, educate what I believe is a healthy dancer. And that is from within. If the dancer is genuinely healthy, then they're going to shine no matter what size or shape they are. And that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't experienced that.
Yeah, that's a really powerful message, and I think injury is hard for any dancer, and especially young dancers. And we always say you can learn a lesson from that, and you can re-educate and relearn and strengthen and feel differently, perhaps.
But I have to say, a lot of that re-education was because I was surrounded by brilliant people. And of course, I work with wonderful psychologists, and we have access to nutritionists and all this sort of stuff. But the holistic approach, as Joe mentioned, enabled me to open up to my sports scientist, Greville, who I work with virtually every single day. I could open up to him about thoughts or issues that perhaps were sneaking back into my head and starting to affect my fuel intake, and share that with the doctor, share that with the physio. It's the support network. So again, for the students watching this, for the parents, the teachers, it's a team approach to this. It really does require all hands on deck.
Yeah. And I think also, like, not that we could do this, but if there were two of you,
Yeah.
one carrying on as you were under fueling and the other then having that light bulb moment, I'd be more than sure that you would have recovered quicker because you were doing the right things, and you would definitely not only recover physically but mentally better. Whereas if you'd have carried on and from the surgery and got back up, you'd have had probably more niggles, more issues, and you might have taken a good 25-30% longer to recover from even just the simple operation, let alone the rest of the journey. So I think the other part of it is the light bulb moment for a lot of people, unfortunately, is the injury, but not the first injury sometimes. And it might not be the second. It's the one that has to make you really reflect. But what I would say is if you really are struggling to recover from an injury, yes, we've got to question the rehab program. Yes, we've got to question all the normal things, but actually maybe you have to look internally, go, could I be doing better myself? And if so, ask for that help.
Yeah, definitely. And Stephen, you've touched on it a little bit, but there's often a perception in ballet that we have to maintain a certain body aesthetic. How do you think that influences eating habits, training habits, and recovery habits? And then have you noticed that yourself in the past and have felt any personal effects on your performance in that space?
My first response always to this kind of question is, who is this ballet god that we're all listening to with this made up perception of what a ballet dancer is meant to look like? Because I maintain, if you lined up all the principal dancers of the Royal Ballet from the very, very early years to today, where the iconic repertoire was created, if you lined up who that ballet was created on and then that choreographer created that one on, you could not say, oh, that's the ideal body type, because they're all unique. But they all brought something incredibly unique to that role. That's why the choreographer chose them. So again, I say, who is this ballet god that has somehow brainwashed all of us, all the teachers, and even the parents of thinking that you have to look a certain way? Because it's not true. We are, of course, performing elite athletes. There is a physical demand that, of course, you've got to be in the greatest fitness and, mental health that you could possibly be in. But it's exactly that. Be in the greatest physical and mental health you can be in, not a completely depleted, empty body.
And Joe, from a medical perspective, what happens to the body when a dancer isn't fueling properly, both in the short term and the long term? What's happening inside?
Yeah, so I've heard lots of different analogies, and the one that I think pretty famous endocrinologist talks about is the low battery mode on the phone. And I think it conceptually makes a lot of sense in this fact that when your battery is on low, your phone, it turns off all the background noise of the apps. That's exactly what's happening to the human body. And with time, that does mean you have the implications we just talked about with regards to maybe not hitting your growth potential, and also the formative years of bone development, i.e. the density factor of your bone, is happening in this influential period now up into your early 20s. And so if you are under-fueling, you're not building that scaffolding, the density in your bone that you want. So from the pure structural performance point of view, your bones are pretty important, let alone then all the other hormones and the metabolic pathways that go on in the body. And I think one thing we sort of tiptoe around about the menstrual cycle is it's normalized to be lost. It's not. It should not be normalized. And yes, there are other reasons other than MED-S, and hence why you should go and get checked out, because actually there might be a structural reason, or you might be someone that has a slight hormonal deficiency other than through suppressing it through energy. But the sad thing is, the longer you are in a deficit, the more you have what we call the metabolic insult. That injury takes for a very long time to recover. And it's really sad to say, but the fertility element doesn't always recover in people. And so for some of these female dancers in particular, they're making decisions about their future adult life that are super important to have those choices if they want them later on. You've got the mental health components, you've got the lack of enjoyment in a social environment because you become so controlling over your food. You don't actually go out for food maybe because it becomes so hard and challenging to be in those environments, which again, when you're at a school, that social development, that interaction, that building the bonding, that's so important to later on in life and development as well. So you've got your physical components, you've got the long-term elements around your fertility and bone health, and then you've got the mental health components, which for some people unfortunately sit with them for the rest of their life, which is a really sad thing to hear because it's something you can do about it.
Yeah, it is. Stephen, do you think that shift is being seen? Do you think we're seeing that shift in the companies around the narrative of this?
I can't speak for all the companies around the world. I know that across the road at the Royal Ballet, the medical team are really working endlessly to create a supportive environment that enables the dancers to access the tools if they want to. But at the end of the day, it has to come from the dancers. It's the dancers who need to demand the shift, basically. And that comes from the next generation who are watching this. Have the faith that putting your health first is a good thing. You are an extraordinary young artist, yes, but you are, number one, a human. And that has to always come before anything.
Yeah. And I think dance schools, I know the Royal Ballet School takes the duty of care around health and wellbeing of students as a top priority, as I'm sure many schools around the world. Jo, what do you think can help schools improve on their awareness and prevention campaigns and strategies? What would the message to schools be?
I mean, firstly, thank you for today, because this is actually the start of it. And I think particularly someone like Stephen being present as a current professional, that is so powerful. A lot of people are willing to put their head above the parapet once they've retired because, the time's done and now it's time for change. Actually doing it during your career, I think it's unbelievably powerful. So I'm very privileged to be sitting here talking to you. I think the fact that we're starting to talk about this as a topic is brilliant. And from my own experience with being, the English National School, Ballet School, they're starting to want me to do multiple assessments and be a part of the education process as part of the multidisciplinary team. And I think that's amazing to hear, because I'm pretty sure that wasn't happening 5 years ago or 10 years ago. I think the more we can do at the beginning of the dancer's journey to educate them, even if it's just to kind of get familiar with the terms, so that if they start to see some change in their body or feel or anything they're just not sure about, they feel more comfortable to ask. But I also have to say, I think it has to come from every avenue. And I think the teachers have to be on board, the pro dancers have to be, the principals have to live and breathe what we're trying to say, because every child is looking up to the principal dancers and wanting to be like them. And if they're seeing them not fueling properly, then they're going to think, well, that's the only way you can be a successful dancer. And so I think it has to be a multi-pronged attack. But I think the great thing is this is a good starting foundation. And I think chatting to the dancers around it, but maybe following up with some extra educational components as the term goes on, can always be of benefit as well.
So, Stephen, would you agree? How do you think teachers and choreographers and directors can play a role in and around body image and nutrition for young people and dancers in companies?
I think that the most important element is the way we speak to each other. How a student speaks to, how a teacher speaks to a student, or a director casts ballets, how a choreographer comes in and perhaps always chooses a particular aesthetic. Those messages are very powerful. What are we doing? Are we celebrating somebody's art and what they're creating? Or are we just searching for a particular aesthetic because perhaps you like that? And obviously, none of us ever know what's going on behind closed doors. So just being aware of how you speak to each other. If somebody perhaps is really looking like they're underfueled, I would have hoped you would have found a way to support them earlier. But if you do find yourself surrounded by dancers that are underfueling, don't then go and encourage it by saying how beautiful they looked performing a variation or something. Give them the encouragement and say, I love how you performed that. I like the choices you made, but don't give them the extra satisfaction of glorifying this underfueled state.
The impact of language can be huge, quite big, and also quite triggering. So it's good to reflect on.
Yeah. And I really changed even myself, who, surrounded by incredible artists every day. I've really found myself changing over the last 5-7 years, the way that I interact with my colleagues, and how, if I see a wonderful performance or a rehearsal, how I actually communicate that. How do I share that, where it really is focused on the art form, not about anything else, because I don't know what is going on in that person's private life.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Joe, what do you think are some practical steps that students can take away to know that they are fueling properly for their training?
Yeah, so it's a really tough question, because I think you do actually look around at your peers and copy and action do it. But for me, with the dancers that I'm dealing with, they're going through a lot of transitions. Some of them have moved away from home for the first time. So they're not, as I said at the beginning, it may not even be an intention, it's an unintentional deficit, because they're cooking at home and they're not really sure what to cook, or they're cooking the same thing. What I would say is, when you look at your plate, and this is going back to basics, is it colourful and it's got the different groups of foods on there? Keep it simple. If it looks like it should look like, i.e. a carrot looks like a carrot, then great. If it's processed and you don't know what it looks like, then probably that's not going to be the most nutritionally beneficial food for you. That doesn't mean you can't have, your treats, your snack, but make sure that the food that you're trying to fuel yourself, the performances, with good nutritional content that's balanced. And I think, again, going back to those tips, it might be talking to your children about what snacks do you enjoy. Let's look into them for you to find out what's the alternative, or what is the right amount for you to be having, because things like, again, I'm picking stuff like carrots and hummus and nuts, they're all very healthy, but they're great forms of energy. And I think people just presume all calories are bad, and they're not. You need them, and you need the different food groups. So look down, make sure you've got a balance. And I would say listen to your body, because your body normally has a hunger pan. But going back to one of those signs of red S, you suppress that to the point where you don't know what hunger is anymore. Yeah. And so one of the shocking things for people when they come out of the energy deficit is, well, what's this feeling? That means your body's rebooting itself. That's a great feeling to have. But unfortunately, some of those natural things that we'd expect people to have get suppressed through it. But education's key. I think if you're lucky enough to be at a school that has the nutritionist on site, go and have a meeting with them, find out what snacks you're needing between sessions, what makes you not feel too full, so that you can still go and be lifted in your partner work without feeling self-conscious. But don't skip the snack. Find the right snacks or the alternatives for you, as well as the meals being balanced.
Yeah, absolutely. Stephen, what strategies do you personally use to try and fit in all the fuel you need throughout your rehearsal schedule and your training and your S&C? Yeah. How do you do it?
I have 3 young children at home, so of course meal times are the focus of every day. The young children want snacks and food all the time, and it's actually a good eye-opening experience when you are around young children, because you see how much fuel they need. And it's a reminder that actually it's a constant thing. It's not, oh, I just have my one meal and I'm fine. Yeah. And the reality is, the work that all of us artists are doing, it's really difficult to get enough in. And what you think is enough is nowhere near enough for the amount of exercise and just sheer effort that we're putting into everything. I think we always underestimate just how much fuel we really, really need. And I simplify it all the time, and I really have tried to live by this since my injuries. Treat your body like a supercar, like the top Ferrari. You could have the most beautiful sports car, but if you put rubbish fuel in it, that car will not function how it's been beautifully designed. And your body's exactly the same. Treat yourself like the most precious supercar on the planet. Put the good fuel in it so that you can go out there and do what you want to do.
Yeah, that's great advice. And I think the sort of rule of thumb here at school is generally 3 meals and 3 snacks as your starting point, with something before bed, and a high protein before bed.
But even that won't work for everybody.
No.
And that's the life's journey, the challenge, but also the fun, that you've got to find what works for you. And that will constantly change. How you are as a student, the workload's a very different workload to professional life. And that will change depending on which company you go to. Different countries have different working cultures. So you need to constantly allow yourself to evolve what is required and what you might need.
And getting advice from the people that
Exactly. And it's always seek out the proper medical advice. Don't get caught up in these social media fads.
Yeah, and I think also with the school in particular, they're going through growth still.
Yeah.
The energy required for growth, on top of then the energy you're expending, as you say, with the precision, the muscular activation, even in an isometric hold, we know those muscles are burning a lot of calories, let alone if you're then getting out of breath. So for me, it is about having listening to your body, but making sure you're getting it through the day. I think the 3 meals and 3 snacks is a good conversation starter. I also think people who wake up hungry in the night, they definitely do need a slow releasing protein to get the quality of sleep that they want, so they're not waking up. But I think, as you say, you have to adapt, and sometimes you might need more. And actually, interestingly, the other time where people suppress or take less food in is during an injury, and actually that's when you need, again, your body more. And so everything that the dance and the beauty do is kind of counter. It's not helping them. It's not helping them recover. It's not helping them perform. And actually, by getting a regular amount in, your body's not going to be doing a stop-start metabolic point of view. 1 meal, okay, well, I don't know when my next calories are coming in. Guess what? It's not going to use it properly because it's gone into, hibernation mode. Like, okay, we need to store it. Whereas actually, if you keep drip feeding food in, the body's like, oh, great, I know when my next source is coming. But I love the analogy of the sports car. I think it's a great thing. You wouldn't put rubbish into a Ferrari.
Yeah, but smooth out is a good analogy. So if a dancer suspects that some of this resonates to them, and they think, oh, maybe I have got this, I'm not sure, what do they do? What's the first thing they should do?
Well, I personally think flip it straight away into a positive.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Well done.
Yeah.
You've recognized, I think I need a bit more support. There's something not quite right here. That's amazing, because then you're investing in your future. Great. You are doing the best thing it could possibly do. Have the confidence that seeking out that support or even some advice is in no way going to have a negative reflection on your career prospects or any of that. It's going to be the opposite.
Yeah, agree. Yeah. I think the first time you speak to someone can be anyone that you trust, and then just making sure you create that environment of, as I say, the environment of people being open to the conversation, then they can get the support to speak to the teacher or speak to the doctor or the physio or the nutrition. I think it's just, as you say, seeing that as a positive as the first step, and then the rest should hopefully come with that, because you've taken the hardest step, but then you're going to reap the benefits.
Brilliant. Well, as we finish up, I'll ask you, Stephen, if you could change one thing about how Reds is addressed in the dance world, what would it be?
Again, I can't speak for all schools and all companies, but the workload situation for many companies is so high, and that I see having probably the major cause and effect of Reds. The sheer practicality of, you have 15 minutes. Okay, well, that's my only window to eat in the next 6 hours. Of course, you're not going to sit down and have a lovely big plate of food. You need it, of course, to get through the day, but that's not the practicality. So it's I think it's a double-edged sword. It's the workload is a lot of the time potentially causing Reds, even if it's not a choice that the artist has made, it's causing it. Yeah. But then, okay, now we need to make sure we have the right support to find ways to prevent reds. Schedule is the schedule. It takes many, many years for that to evolve and to adapt and to find slots of breaks. So work with professionals to find ways to fuel in order to get there. That would be my hope.
Yep.
That we get to a point where the schedule does enable proper refueling, so that when reds is identified, it simplifies it in a way that we know that's a choice that that person's made. It's not being inflicted on.
Yeah. So I guess a bit of timetabling with intention around the rest and fueling sequences.
That it's seen fueling, recovery, rest. It's seen that as a necessity, as part of a schedule. It's not just something like, oh, go and have a good sleep and you'll be fine tomorrow. That just doesn't work. You could have the best night's sleep in the world if you haven't fueled all day and for weeks and months and years. It's not going to work. So it's seeing these elements as actually part of your working day as well.
And Jo, what's the key message that you want dancers, teachers, and parents to take away from this week's discussions on reds?
I mean, I think for me, it's first and foremost hearing about it and acknowledging that there is this relative energy deficiency is a real thing, and being open to the conversations. If you do recognize anything we've talked about, I think it's really important not to see it as intrusive. If someone flags and says, I think it's worth you going to speak to the doctor or nutritionist, see it as a, wow, flip it. This is great. They're taking good care of me. They're concerned about my future life as a professional dancer, and flip it in your mind, see it as a positive, not a negative. And then through that, I think you'll be able to get a much more multidisciplinary approach to it. And I think making it a conversation that's not taboo. And the culture, I mean, I could go on, there could be loads, the culture shift, the timetable. But I think for me, the start is by acknowledging it exists, which it does, we know. And then by making the avenues for getting help more accessible, because we normalise the conversations.
Well, thank you both for introducing RED so clearly today as part of RED's Awareness Week, as the IDA group. I think you've both highlighted brilliantly how important it is that we redefine success, perhaps, in dance training to prioritise health, longevity, performance, and being very intentional about that, and how it is a multidisciplinary effect with student and parent and teachers and schools. But there's so much information and support, and it's such a wave of change at the moment. It actually feels like a brilliant opportunity to kind of redefine and put the artist first and enable them to run that car in the best way possible. So thank you so much for your time, and we hope you have a wonderful week.
Thank you.